Hello friends, I hope your answer writing program is going very well. Today on day 4, we had given you a question on disaster management. This question is basically a question that was asked in mains examination 2015. Major cities in India are becoming vulnerable to flood conditions. In 2015, it was a 12.5 mark question. That's why you had to write it in 200 words. But now, since UPSC is asking 10 mark and 15 mark question, we have made it a 15 mark question. Now coming to major cities in India are becoming vulnerable to flood conditions. Discuss. What was the demand of the question? Cities' vulnerability to flood condition. What a lot of you have done is, you have written down about floods, like different reasons because of which flood may take and all those things. Now, all the kinds of floods were not relevant here. Why are cities becoming more vulnerable to flood conditions? What are the specific things in cities which are making cities vulnerable to floods? Those should have been the focus of your answer. Now, as I spoke in the previous video, generally your answer should be divided into 3 sections: intro, main body and conclusion, right? This should consume 20% or less than 20%. This should consume more than 60%, 60% or more than 60%, and this should consume another 20% or less than 20% of your answer. This is what we had learned in the previous video when we discussed disaster management, when we discussed the institutional framework of disaster management. Many of you are still writing answers in words much more than the word limit. Please avoid doing that. So in this answer, you had around 50 words for introduction, around 150 words for your main body, and 50 words for your conclusion. 20% of 250 is 50, 150 and 50. So come to introduction. In introduction, you talk about the extent of the problem. For example, the topic is saying, the question is saying major cities in India are becoming vulnerable to flood conditions. So you explain, show this vulnerability. In the core body, we will discuss the reasons for it, but here you show that yes, vulnerability is increasing. And therefore, what we have done is, we have given some examples. We have introduced our answer with some examples showing that yes, our major cities are facing the flood situation. So recent instances of floods such as the one in Mumbai 15 years back, in Chennai 5 years back, and in Hyderabad this year. We have given examples from all the recent time periods from different regions in the country, illustrate the increasing vulnerability of Indian cities to floods. First thing, you have shown that yes, Indian cities are becoming vulnerable. Other way you could have started, like this is one way of introducing, you substantiate the statement that has been given in the question with some example. This is one way of starting your intro. Second way you could have started your intro here was, you could have talked about the damages that Hyderabad faced recently. That is, you could have talked about the current issue on this particular thing. Or you could have just defined urban floods. That's like, I personally do not prefer basic definition that urban floods are floods which occur in urban areas. Those kind of things should be avoided. Whenever you look at a good article, let's say when you read Hindu, you'll never see that they start with some definition. They start with some recent context. They start with some examples. Good articles go like that. So good answers should also go like that. Good matured answers should also go like that. So definition is something with which a school student start their answers. You can still avoid it. So preferably in introduction, try to substantiate what has been given in the question with some examples. Now come to the main body. Here we'll discuss what are the reasons because of which Indian cities are becoming vulnerable to flood situation. And please note that, as I told you, many of you have focused on floods, different types of floods and all, rather than focusing on cities. Indian cities are becoming vulnerable. So this question, a question on urban flood, was also asked in paper 1 and paper 3. In paper 1, it could be asked because of urbanization and problems associated with them. In paper 3, it could be asked because disaster management is part of your syllabus. In both the things, focus should have been the problems in urban areas which are leading to become increased vulnerability. Now, let's come to what are the key reasons because of which flood occurs because of which Indian cities are becoming vulnerable to floods. Unplanned urbanization would be one key thing. We know that for most of the problems in urban areas, one key factor is unplanned urbanization. Now, in unplanned urbanization, what are the dimensions? Dimension first is increased concretization. NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority's report says that our cities have become more and more concretized, and therefore when water falls, water is not able to seep into the ground, and if a lot of rain falls within a small period of time, all of it flows on the surface, creating the flood situation. So this is one major reason. We have planned our cities in such a way, in such an unscientific way, that we have impacted the hydrological cycle. Then destruction of ponds and lakes. Traditionally, earlier we used to have cities which had many ponds and many lakes. So when rainfall took place, most of the water got collected in those ponds, in those lakes, and from there they percolated inside in the groundwater, as well as they remained stored in those ponds and those lakes. But in recent years, over the last 3-4 decades, we have destroyed most of those ponds and lakes. We have illegally occupied them, filled them, and raised buildings over them. For example, here you'll have an example from Chennai, where in 1980s Chennai used to have around 600 water bodies, which have come down to 50 currently. Then another reason because of which we can include in unplanned urbanization is encroachment of floodplains. This is the river. This is the general width of the river, but at the time of floods, it will even cover this region. So traditionally, human beings used to leave this region alone. They would not create habitation places here. They would do paddy cultivation here, but rahenge nahi yahan pe. But with the development of cities, what we have done, we have encroached these floodplains as well. So when water level rises, it doesn't have that floodplain on which it can flow. It enters the city. And this encroachment of floodplain is also an example of unplanned urban development. In fact, the second point that we want to discuss is also related to unplanned urban development. It is specifically talking about improper and inadequate drainage system. The drainage system, what is the role of drainage system? Drainage system role is take the wastewater to outside the city, or take the rainwater to outside the city. But what has happened in Indian cities is, one, this drainage system is old and therefore is not able to cater to the amount of water that is released now. Two, we have not maintained these drains properly. So because of poor maintenance, silting has taken place. Silting prevents the flow of water. Sometimes solid waste has been put into these drains. That solid waste again blocks the flow of water. So when rainfall occurs and when these drains are either very small or are full of solid waste, or a lot of silt has been deposited in it, it prevents the flow of water, leading to the problem of urban floods. Mumbai floods of 2005. One of the major reasons of 2005 Mumbai flood was this silting that had taken, this blockage of drainage system that had taken place. So when a lot of rainfall took place, the water was not easily able to get washed off. So this is also something that you can discuss under the dimension of unplanned urban development. There are some other reasons also, reasons like climate change. Because of climate change, what has happened? Because of climate change, we have seen variability in rainfall. Sometimes no rainfall would take place, and on the other occasion, very heavy rainfalls would take place. Something that happened in Hyderabad recently. A lot of rainfall took place on a single day, flooding the whole city. This happened because of climate change. Now you may have a question. So a lot of rainfall took place, that took place because of climate change, but the water was not able to go through drains because of improper drainage system. Water was not able to flow easily because of the poor conditions, or water was not, it became a situation of floods because we had destroyed most of the water bodies. We had made the city concrete, because of which water was not able to get absorbed in the ground. Water could not get absorbed in the ground. So this was the third reason. Then there are other factors like social apathy, generally attitude of people. What we end up doing, we keep dumping our waste, dead bodies, religious symbols into rivers. It also blocks the flow of river. So in case of flood situation in urban areas, because river is blocked, most of the water would flow into the city, would get into the city. Then poor socio-economic conditions are also responsible for it. People who live in very poor conditions, they do not have proper houses and all. Now what happens to them is, they are ready to live anywhere they want, even in very vulnerable situation. And even besides the river, on the river banks, which are very vulnerable to flood, they will settle down. So it is, why is it so? You and me will not go and settle down there because you are worried what happens in case of flood. But they do not have a choice. The poor economic condition, socio-economic condition of India may also lead to encroachment of the river beds, especially in urban areas, leading to the problem of urban floods. Then absence of political will. All these problems could be resolved if government is motivated enough, if government ensures that our urban local bodies have enough funds through which they can have enough resources, through which they can ensure better cleaning of better cleaning of drains, larger size of drains, protection of our water bodies. In the absence of proper funds, these things are not possible, these things are not feasible. Now come to, how do we deal with this problem? First of all, urban planning. The key reason, the core reason for urban flood is urban planning. So urban planning should keep geological and hydrological cycle in mind. Hydrological cycle, like what rainfall when takes place, some of it should get absorbed in the ground. There should be lakes, ponds, etc. where they'll get stored, which will act as sink. So urban planning should be such that we are not concretizing the whole city. Even the pavements which are creating are percolating in nature, and water should be allowed to go down. Ponds and lakes should be widened, silt should be removed, it should be deepened. We should try to recover our ponds and lakes which have been destroyed. These are certain things that we'll have to keep in mind. Then drainage system has to be enhanced. Its capacity has to go up, its maintenance has to go up. We may also plan a separate drainage system for river water in those cities which are very vulnerable to urban floods. Then social attitude needs to change. Social attitude, like we can decide that we will produce less solid waste. If we produce less solid waste, there would be less chance that that waste would go and block the drains or go and block the river. That is one thing that can be done. Then we can reduce dumping into water bodies. We can develop rainwater harvesting system. Now, if in Hyderabad, every home, every building had proper rainwater harvesting system, even then what would have happened? Even if a lot of rainfall would have taken place, most of the water would have got stored in that rainwater harvesting system, leading to less water being available to flow on the roads and create the situation of floods. In spite of all these things, in spite of proper urban management, in spite of social change in social attitude, in spite of improved infrastructure, there may be cases when urban floods would still occur. So for that situation, what we have to be ready with is disaster preparedness. What is disaster preparedness? Disaster preparedness, may you identify which are the areas which are vulnerable. You map those areas in the city and start taking steps to reduce the risk of those cities or those areas in the city. So hazard vulnerability map can be created. Early warning system could be established in those places, so that after a particular amount of rainfall, you know that those areas in the city do get submerged by water. Why can't we warn people earlier to evacuate from those places? These are the components of disaster preparedness that also should be ready. So we should try to prevent the disaster, but sometimes disasters are not preventable, and for that we should be ready to deal with it. These are some ways in which you can deal with the disaster. Now, in conclusion can be, so this was the core content of your answer. You can write a lot of other things, but I realized when I was writing this model answer that most of it, it is already more than 300 words, so I did not want to write more. You can give some more reasons, but try to ensure that you are writing in the word limit. And finally, conclusion. In conclusion, you should try to take a positive stance. That is, right now, urban Indian cities are vulnerability to urban flood may be going up, but if all the stakeholders, we as citizens, government, environmental bodies, etc., if we all decide to work together, along with urban development authorities, we can reduce this vulnerability further. Here, we can have initiatives like Sponge Cities Mission. So in Sponge Cities Mission, what can be done is we can increase the sponginess of the city, that is water absorption capacities of the city. Right now, cities are not absorbing a lot of water, most of the water is flowing. So you can talk about these things like bring all the stakeholders together. So yahan pe what we have done is we must not allow nature, human conduct and urbanization to be mystified and rendered as trans-historic villains. So what we are saying here, that nature, human conduct and urbanization, these should not be made the villain. What we need to do is we can learn to live with nature, we can regulate human conduct through the state, and we can strategically design where we build. तो ड्रेनेज सिस्टम कैसा होगा, आपका अर्बन एरियाज किस तरह से डेवलप होगा, किस तरह से प्लान होगा, we should focus on those, we should keep nature always in mind, and we should ensure that human activities are properly regulated through the conduct or through the government, so that our activities are not contributing to the issue of urban flood. So again, you can conclude in many different ways you want. In your answers, for your conclusion, you may have received personalized feedback, but this was the overall issue of urban floods. Okay, I'll see you day after tomorrow again. I'll upload a video again when we discuss the third section on floods, third section on disaster management. So in the previous video, we dealt with institutional framework. In this video, we are dealing with natural disaster, and in the next video, we will deal with human-made disaster. Now you may say that, sir, urban floods are also human-made. Yes, in fact, most of the disasters are human-made. Earthquake, cyclone, tsunami, these are all natural phenomena. They become disaster because of human activities. But there are some disasters which will specifically deal with in urban disaster, which are even initiated because of human activities. यहाँ पे the flood may occur because of heavy rainfall. But the third section of the disaster management, for example, explosives management, for example, problems because of mining, these are certain things, certain disasters which occur because of human activities specifically. This we will deal with in the third section, that is on day 6. So this was day 4. Keep writing, keep preparing. All the best.
Hit the bell icon to never miss an update from LevelUp IAS. Make sure you like, share, comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel.